Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this Logic Property Wealth Australia webinar. This is only the second webinar that we've done, and I'm hoping that you will enjoy what I'm about to say over the next 50 minutes. So I'm just going to flick over to some PowerPoint, and I'll come back and you'll see me, and we'll flick to some slides throughout the presentation. I have to put this up. This is ASIC requirements. This is a general advice warning. The advice contained in the document is of general nature and does not constitute specific financial advice. For a detailed financial strategy, you should consult with a qualified financial advisor before making an investment decision. Please be advised that I am not a financial advisor nor an accountant. I don't want to be a financial advisor, nor do I need or want to be an accountant. I do hold a full real estate agent's license, 073198L. The reason why I had to study to get that is because I was not able to present anything to do with property unless I did hold that full agent's license. Yeah, that's who we are. The agenda for today's webinar is very simple. I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to myself and Logic Property Wealth Australia. I'm going to talk about the safest way to create wealth through property. I'm going to talk about the three things which drive capital growth, and I'll talk about three suburbs our clients are investing in right now because they meet our strict criteria for purchase and for duplication. I'm going to talk about exactly how many properties that you would need to replace your income and how to get those properties in the shortest period of time. I'm going to talk about the wealth triangle and how it can make you financially secure, what that is. This is just a little bit about who we are, who my company is. We trade as, I should say, Capital Investment Concepts Proprietary Limited trades as Logic Property Wealth Australia. It was officially formed in 2008. My company, I've been in this game for nearly 20 years, been working with in the wealth creation industry since 1997 and helped over 1,800 clients create portfolios totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. I select all our property with my staff, meets all of our criteria. We've discussed this, and I've discussed this with over 15,000 people throughout the last 20 odd years. The formula for purchasing and securing financial independence is a tried and tested formula by my clients and of course myself. And I'm going to go over most of these important points throughout the presentation. The most important thing on this thing here is to understand that very few people build wealth in property. There's very, very few people. I'll show you later on exactly how many people own X amount of numbers of properties. But over the next 50 odd minutes throughout the presentation, I'll explain to you why that's the case. You'll find a way in which you can build wealth for yourself using exactly this method. You'll see just how elite I say my clients are and have become with their ability to duplicate their own asset base time and time again. So you can write to us, you can write some questions if you feel free. You can write emails requesting info and I'll get back to you at a later time. Simply, the safest way to create wealth with property. Well, you've got to buy property for a start to be able to build wealth in property. That's pretty simple. You need to hold and you need to be able to duplicate. Now, what does all that mean? Buy, hold, duplicate. It is simply as the words say. And the duplication side of things requires a structure to ensure that you have reliable cash flow and, of course, to ensure that you will obtain capital growth. Once you've got those main points in place, then you have this triangle that then will allow you to duplicate. Property specific, let's get serious. There's only one thing that we need to know about property, and that is land appreciates and buildings depreciate. And this is where most people in property fall down. And what happens is, and the reason why they fall down is because they don't understand the true meaning of real estate is, well, real estate is land. You buy property, you get a title for a block of land, and you get a title for that property. You can smash down the building, you can build new buildings, but the one thing that stays forever is the land. If you understand that land is the commodity that appreciates and all buildings depreciate, then you'll know that the best type of investment in the property industry is something that has a component of land. Now, my criteria, which I've been explaining to people for 20 years, is that you'll need 30 to 40% of your initial investment being the land component. Now, if you buy property out in the suburbs, you can get a larger piece of land. Although the developers now, their average development block size is 350 to 380 square metres. However, buying a block of land in Richmond or in a city, you're paying a lot more per square metre than what you would further away from the CBD. I'll just go back to my PowerPoint presentation. So land appreciates, buildings depreciate, and if you can just focus on those two things, then you're not going to go too far wrong in property. That really is the most important thing. The safest way to create wealth with property is you've got to buy land. Now, if you could only buy land and hold land, you could never go wrong. However, the problem is in buying land on its own is that you can't, or you don't get any income. There's no yield from the land. So we need to put something on the land. And you hear people say, oh, don't overcapitalise, and it is especially pertinent for investing. The more you put on it, as in the box, I call it the box you're putting on the land, the more you're restricting the growth of your investment. The other key point for the safest way to create wealth with property is you've got to stay in the affordable bracket. Now, if for whatever reason in the future you wish to sell your property, then if your property is in an affordable bracket for all that can buy, you've got more buyers. The same thing being with rent. You must have continual rent. So if your property is, or I should say if your property is affordable, the rents will be affordable. They'll be affordable for everybody that rents. Now, please also remember, this is very, very important, 90% of the people that rent are in the lower income bracket, 90%. So it makes sense that if you want to have your property rented and tenanted all the time, you need to focus on rent or affordable rent, so as that everybody who does rent can afford to rent your property. Obviously, it's got to be a desirable area, but affordability is a big, big key. So keeping everything affordable, I should say. The property, the rent, and that makes sure that your cash flow is affordable. I'll just flip back and explain to you something which is very important with rent. So, affordability is a big key. Now, how do we work out what is affordable or not? If we look at the Australian Bureau of Statistics, they tell us that the average income in Australia at the moment is around about $70,000 a year. Somewhere last year it was 66,000. It's around about 70,000. The average person isn't earning that. That's the average income. So that includes all people that are earning, millions of dollars, as well as people who are earning $20,000. The average person's probably only earning around $40,000 to $45,000 a year. However, if we look at the average income, we need to understand, well, how do the banks work out what's affordable for people? How do they work out how much people can borrow? But how do they work out how much people can afford to rent? And for 100 years plus, they use the same formula, and that is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. They suggest 1/3 of your income goes in tax. 1/3 is then used for living purposes, and then the other third is and can be used for housing, whether it's for repayments of your loan, mortgage, or for rent. So if we look at someone who's earning $60,000 to $70,000 a year, at, as an example, $60,000, and if I'm looking at a third of that being $20,000, that effectively means that the affordability for that person for rent is around about $400 a week. So if I go up another $10,000 a year, I take that, up to say around about 400, 450, around that mark. If I keep my properties in that mark, I basically, any person who's earning the average wage, or a household that's earning the average income, they can afford to rent my property, and that makes a real big point. I'll just flip back to the PowerPoint presentation. So, keeping everything affordable, buying the property, making sure that's affordable, making sure the rent's affordable, and of course that maintains our cash flow. The three most important things for capital growth. Now, this is very different. Obviously, location is really important. Now you'll hear real estate agents say the most important thing is location, location, location. That's not true. Now, location is one of the most important points, but they say location, 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 so they can sell property in their own area at any particular time of a cycle. But what we say about location, and I'll cover the points of location a little bit later, but why we're saying location is important, so is that there is demand for your investment property continuously. Land content, I need a minimum of 30 to 40% of my initial investment being what I'm paying for the land. So that means I need to be able to decipher how much is the land I'm paying and what's the building worth. And I'll cover that a little bit later as well. And the third thing is timing. Timing in the game is the most important thing. It's very, very, very difficult to pick exactly where we are on a cycle and what will happen, because we are affected by our economic situation, the country's economic situation, and also things that happen overseas. Australia, we were supposedly told that we weren't affected by the GFC. Well, we all know that's rubbish. We have been affected, but our property market still has continued on, and it's still moved. Sydney, as an example, has had exceptional growth, over the last 4 to 5 years. Melbourne's had great growth in its inner city, or within 20 k's area. We'll probably see more of the growth of Melbourne's outer suburbs over the next couple of years. Brisbane, as an example, which is very interesting, Brisbane hasn't had a lot of growth for the last 7 or 8 years. So I'll explain a little bit later why I am actually bullish on the Brisbane market. But timing is obviously very important. Timing of when you buy and how long you are in the market for. The three components of income, as in cash flow, well, your employment income is very, very important. The banks aren't going to give you a loan unless you've got steady income. The second thing from us is rental income. So, that's one of the reasons why I say we need to keep our investment properties affordable. So as we're pretty much guaranteeing rent, because we've got everybody that rents that can afford our property or your property. And the third thing, of course, is we need to take advantage of tax, or the taxable claims and deductions that we can make. Most people that own investment property don't claim all what they can claim. Most accountants don't understand what they can claim. They are accountants. They're not wealth building people in most cases. So most people aren't claiming all their tax, but you do need to take advantage of the tax system. What you can claim, if you are going to be able to hold as many properties as you can, or let's even change that around and say, if you're going to hold enough properties to secure your retirement income. And in a few slides' time, I'm going to talk about what you actually need to have a retirement, or a quality retirement, how many properties you need to hold, how long you need to hold them for. Why property? Well, I suppose the question is, why do the banks see property as the most secure asset class and are prepared to lend much more in leverage for property than in any other assets, shares? Shares at the moment, even blue chip shares, you'd be lucky to get leverage of about 50%. But still, we can go to the bank and get 80 and 90% loans on property. Why has property stood the test of time for not just the recent period, but for thousands of years? You go back through England and through Ireland and these places, and you can see, that the landlords became extremely wealthy and created their wealth using exactly the same principles of what we're talking about today. And why will property continue to be an outstanding investment vehicle? I read so much rubbish and crap in the papers about, we're on a bust area, and Australia's properties are not affordable, and you know what? All I know is that there's one thing, and I've been doing property for quite a long time. Any product, no matter what it is, when there is demand for that product, you can increase your price. When there is no demand, you can't increase your price. And for us, the type of property that Australians live in, which is house and land in suburbs, there is a strong demand. We have an undersupply of that stock. The opposite is we've got an oversupply of inner city apartments, mainly that have been financed by foreign investors or major foreign investment companies. But for us, we've got an undersupply of the type of properties that people want to live in our capital cities. This is a really, really important slide. I mentioned to you before, I said that very few people build wealth in property. And if we look at Australia, we've, as of today, the 19th of April, we've got 24 million people. 24 million people. Of those 24 million, incredibly, only 4.9% own a residential property for investment. A residential property for investment. 1.189 million people. That's out of our total population. Not a lot. Now, out of those people, 84.5% of those people, 84.5% only ever own one property. Now, one property is not going to do it for you, because you try paying off your own home and then paying off another investment property, you've got to be earning a hell of a lot of money to be able to do that. So we need to have a structure that's going to help us, which we'll cover in a moment. But just going back to this, if I look further forward, 11% of the people that own a residential investment property own between 2 and 4, or get to own between 2 and 4. It gets even worse. 1.4% of the people that own residential investment property, that's 16,656 people in Australia, own 5 or more. And if you really want to see the qualified people that are serious investors that own 11 or more properties, there's only 0.2%. 0.2%. That's not 0.2% of the total population, but 0.2% of the people that own a residential investment property have 11 or more properties. That's just over 2,300 people. Now, for me, luckily for me, I got into that bracket after around about year 6 of starting my investment portfolio. And I say lucky because it is true. I needed to learn. I was taught the stuff that I'm talking to you about. I'm not making this up. It's stuff that's been passed down from generation to generation. So when I look at those statistics, I'm looking at it and saying, wow, very few people really know what they're doing. Yet there's so many people that have an opinion, and so many real estate agents and financial planners and all these people that have an opinion on property, but very few actually do it. And the reason being, they don't know what they're doing. They don't set a serious goal for themselves, and they don't know how to duplicate. Very, very important. This is how Australians retire. Incredibly, we've got a generation of Australians that are retiring, that are over 65 now, that are retiring on the poverty line. Now, that in itself is very scary. And you know what? It's going to get a lot worse as more of the baby boomers go into retirement, and then the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. Now, when I look at these statistics, these are from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, we've got 94% of Australians that are retiring on less than $50,000 a year. And we've only got less than 1% of Australians that are retiring on above 75 or above what some people see as the average type of income. If I go back to the 85.2% of Australians that are retiring on less than 25,000, they literally are retiring on the pension or, the poverty line, basically. So, look, I put this slide up not to scare you, but just to make you aware that if you don't do something in life, you're going to get nothing. And basically, most Australians believe that they can just work and they think that the government's going to look after them. And, unfortunately, 5, 10, 20, 30 years, I don't know how long it will be, but, the pensions are going to change as well. So it is a bit of a scary slide, but it makes people, aware of what the circumstances like those as quick as you can. What that means is you must ensure that you can afford to hold these. It's always within your budget. To hold or where the cycle is for Melbourne or Sydney or Brisbane or Perth or Adelaide or wherever it may be. I don't know that because I don't have a crystal ball. But I do know that the median home price of Australia has doubled every 7 to 10 years and has done for 100 years. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that will actually happen in the future, right? But if we go to areas where there's strong demand and where we meet the criteria, we've got a very good chance of that happening. If I just look at the third point there about cash flow, making sure that it's always within your budget. Right as we are today, we have the lowest interest rates that we've had for 70 years, the lowest interest rates for 70 years. So, if you are not looking at purchasing property to substantiate your portfolio for your retirement at the moment, because you're saying, oh, well, it's costing too much, then you're not doing your calculations right. And I suggest to you, write to me and I'll look at your situation. But really, we're in the best position we have ever been in my lifetime, and most likely in your lifetime, to be purchasing and holding property for a very, very minimal effect or no cost at all. How many properties do you need? Well, let's look at it. If you hold 5 or 6 properties for a complete cycle and the whole portfolio doubles, which is what a cycle is, then your loan to value ratio will be around 40%. Because initially you've put in deposits, 10 or 20% deposit on the properties, and then you may have used the growth to buy another one, but the whole of your portfolio is doubled, so you'll have a minimum of 50% growth of every, 100% growth of every property, being 50% debt, 50% yours, plus also the deposits that you've put in, which should end up being around about that 40% debt mark of your portfolio. That's a really, really, really strong position. If you retire your debt, in other words, by selling off a couple of these properties, you can then retire on positive income from the rent of around $60,000 in today's money. Now, I'm not talking about being a multi-millionaire and having, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. If you want that, you've got to set your goal a hell of a lot higher than what we're talking here. But if you just do as what we're saying here, it'll give you around about $60,000, maybe $70,000 a year of positive income for you in today's money. And that will put you in the top 1 or 2% of Australians of how they retire. As we can see here, we've only got around 1% of Australians that are retiring on $75,000 a year or more, and a whole generation that's retiring on the poverty line. I'll just flick back for a sec. So the wealth triangle, which I'm about to talk about, the wealth triangle is 3 components. And it's a triangle that allows us, when all three work, to duplicate into our next property. So the first thing that we need to focus on is reliable, or I should say reliable growth, making sure that we get growth. Now, I hear all these property gurus and they say, oh, you should only buy positively geared properties and you can do this. And I bought, 20, 30, 40, 50 properties and all. Look, most of the time it's jargon and crap. So what I'm saying to you is that if we don't get growth from our property, you're not going to be able to duplicate. You're not going to be able to use that property to refinance and then use the growth part as your deposit for your next property and your next and your next. So it's imperative that we get growth. And with growth, the three components for growth are location, remember, land content, and getting our timing right. Timing in the market, and then timing of where you buy each and every property. Now, for 20 years, I've been saying to all my clients, and they know that they buy Melbourne, they buy Brisbane, and they buy Perth. For me, I've stayed away from Sydney. They want to buy Sydney, I'm happy to sort them out there, but I've stayed away from Sydney because it's at the upper end of the affordability bracket. The properties that we're talking about, trying to keep in the affordable standard sort of homes. In Sydney, you're buying them, way out in the Blue Mountains, 60 kilometres, sometimes 70 kilometres out. You're paying, now $850,000, $900,000 for that property, where in Melbourne, you could pay $450 to $500, $550, maybe even $600, but in Brisbane, you're paying, sort of $450 to $500 as well. So you don't need to go to the extent of that Sydney market. I'm not suggesting it's not a good market. It's a wonderful market. For me and for my clients, I've put them into mainly Melbourne, Brisbane, and the Perth markets. Now, that's about capital growth. On the next important thing is cash flow. And as I said to you before, you've got to have a job to get a loan. You've got to have a job so as that you've got income, because your portfolio at time you may need to kick something into it to ensure that it's maintained. But we need to obviously have a job for buying and getting loans. You need to make sure that the rent is always continuous, and stay away from people that offer you rental guarantees. That's rubbish. It's always stacked into or on top of the price or the real price of the property. For me, don't go anywhere near those. Most of those are on apartments, because there's such a high vacancy of apartments and units that they need to give a guarantee, to get people to buy them from start. For me, affordability, keeping affordability in strong demand areas. And of course, the third component of income is making sure that we take advantage of all the tax concessions that the government will allow us to do so. I have a document that shows us all of what you can claim for your tax. If you want that, just email me or email info at capitalinvestmentconcepts.com.au, and we'll send you that info. So once we've got growth and then we've got income, the triangle all of a sudden works. The top part is to be able to duplicate. So being able to duplicate is the key, because you don't get to have multiple numbers of properties unless you can duplicate. Now, passive wealth building is the idea, and even people who are active in trading, they still need to have a passive wealth building structure to get growth. Let me also say, to build wealth, you've got to use leverage. That's the bank's money. What that will allow you to borrow. You've got to have that leverage. But you also got to get the benefits of compound growth. And compound growth is growth on growth. That means holding multiple numbers of properties. So we focus on capital growth, being the land component, capital city, strong demand area. We'll cover that, all the principles of that in a minute. We also must have cash flow, reliable cash flow, having a job, strong rent, which means it's got to be, when I say strong rent, continual rent. It means staying in the affordable bracket and taking advantage of the tax. And once we've got that, then we have this ability to duplicate. Let's have a look at the demographics. of the criteria for duplication. For me and for every one of my clients, we stick to a capital city with a population above 1 million. That means that if there's a downturn in the economy or if unemployment goes higher, there's multiple facets of employment. I stay away from the regional markets like the mining areas because, we've had, the mining areas, everyone 2 or 3 or 4 years ago was, oh, this is the greatest investment of all time. I kept saying to all of my clients, don't go near it. Don't go near it. Don't go near it. What's happened? China's not taking much of our resources. And of course, now properties that were boomed up to $700,000 and $800,000. People can't get rid of them for $50,000 to $60,000, and they don't have any tenants in there because the mines aren't unemploying as many people. Stick to a capital city with a population of above 1 million. I also want the average number of people to be 3 or more per household. I get this from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. It's not a difficult thing to find out. Why do I want it to be above 3? Because the average number of people per household in Australia is 2.6, 2.7. If I'm in an area that's above 3, I'm in a family-orientated type of area, which is what I want. I want the average income per household to be above 1,000 net per week, 1,000 per week. So it means that I am around about the average or better than the average income. Remember, I just want the average growth the country's done for 100 years. Also want those suburbs to be above 70% owner occupied. So why? I need there to be a demand for my rental property, but also owner occupiers are the ones that do up their properties, put in a swimming pool, add another room on or whatever it may be, and they add value to the area. The median age is very important because I want to see who are the people that are living in there. Are they going to be having more children? Are they retiring? Are they going to be selling their houses? Are they going to be, doing it up? How is it going to work? Growth criteria. I want higher property values that are existing or guaranteed to be coming into the area. Now, existing is pretty simple because I can see if I'm paying 500, I can see if there's properties that are 6, 7, 8, and 900. But guaranteed is an interesting one. Guaranteed that there needs to be more future development that's going to happen in the area, and more importantly, that the developer has a covenant on the type of property that needs to be built. So in other words, they can never build a cheaper property than the one that maybe you're building for your investment property. The demand criteria, this is why Australians live where they live. Schools is the number 1 reason. Family security, number 2. Transport, 3. Shopping centres, 4. Jobs, 5. Recreation, 6. Now, if I look at the demographics up the top and I stick to a capital city with a population of above 1 million, I meet all of those 6 points of the demand criteria. And as I've mentioned before, a minimum of your total investment needs to be 30% land value. 30% land value. Okay, it's very, very important. If I've got 30 to 40%, then and I'm in a demand area, then I should be able to expect to at least get the average growth that the country will give me. If I look at finance, it's important on the capital growth side of things because I need to know what the valuation is, or more importantly, what the bank's assessment of the property is. That may not be the real price of the property, right? In most cases it won't be because they're conservative each time, but I want to know how much security I'm putting in, and more importantly for the next purchase and the next purchase. We used to be able to control this a lot more, but unfortunately now with the VALEC system it's nearly impossible, and any off the plan types of properties, we're getting slaughtered across the country on valuations, specifically because the banks, that's the way the banks tighten up their lending and making sure that they're protected. But we want to ensure that market value is reflected as best as we possibly can. Borrow 100% of the cost at interest only. Interest only, all the banks will allow you to go interest only for 5 years. Most will allow you to roll it over for at least another 10 years. At that stage, if you're wanting to continue to go interest only, you may need to change banks, or in truth, you could go to a principal and interest loan at that time because there's so much rent. Your rent should have increased dramatically over the first 5 to 10 years, so as that your properties become positively geared, well and truly positively geared, even if it's not positively geared from the start. The borrowing institution must use a minimum of 80% of the projected rental income when they're assessing how much I can borrow. Now, this is really important if I'm going to hold multiple numbers, if I'm going to be able to duplicate. It's very, very important. One of the vital points, Westpac, as an example, will only use 75% of the rental income. If they're assessing product like apartments, inner city apartments, sometimes they won't use any of the rental income or any of the projected rental income because they know that there's such an oversupply and a huge vacancy rate of that type of product. I want to use a bank that will allow me to do a 90% loan each and every time if I choose to. Now, if I've got loads of equity in my own home, then I'm far better off not doing a 90%. I'm far better off doing an 80% and borrowing the 20% from my line of credit as such, because then I avoid mortgage insurance. But if I need to do a 90% loan each time for ability to hold, remember you've got to hold as many as you possibly can, then I need to use a loan that a bank, that will let me go up to 90%. Remember, the mortgage insurance is a deductible amount that you can deduct off your tax in the first 5 years anyway. Cross-collateralising is when you are putting the security of one property up against the security of another property. And I don't like people doing that, especially with your own home. I like people to set up a line of credit on their equity in their own home, using that equity as deposits for their investments, and then borrowing for their investments with another bank. Then effectively the bank with your investment loan has no security over your own home. It's a much, much stronger position for protection of your assets. Need to understand each bank's loan to value ratio for each type of dwelling. They'll lend completely different for apartments as they will for housing, completely different, and the security for each is very different as well. Recognise the debt to service ratio calculation for each specific purchase. So, this is how much serviceability they're looking at, and this changes continuously and changes from person to person depending on the strength of your company or the strength of your job. With cash flow, we need reliable income. So we need to look at taxable income. We need to ensure that everything's within our budget. We need to make sure that there's less than 30% of the investors in a suburb for demand for tenants. We need to make sure we take out all insurance, building and contents, landlord protection, and rental if available. But certainly you must take out your landlord protection insurance, that it costs you only around $300 a year. It's a deductible amount, and it covers you against the tenant maliciously damaging any part of your property, and not paying the rent covers you up to 16 weeks if they're not paying the rent. Keep your rent in the affordable bracket. Make sure your vacancy rates are less than 3%. 3% is what the real estate agencies or the Real Estate Institute of Australia, they call that a full book at 3%. So if it's a 3% vacancy rate, that's a strong rental area, and they're suggesting that once tenants change over, you should be no more than 2 to 3 weeks maximum away from a changeover of tenant. Always employ a licensed property manager. It's a deductible amount. This is a business that you need to set up, and you need to set it up and think of it logically, not emotionally. You need to think of it logically. With the dwelling, obviously we've got to have a reliable and a registered builder. 100% guaranteed fixed price contract, very important. For me, all of my clients' contracts I get sent straight to the lawyer before they sign it. I make sure that they're subject to finance, and I make sure that the lawyer has gone through it and checked it all out and given the okay for the client to sign the property, sign on the contract. Obviously, you've got to sign a contract so as you can submit it to finance, but we make sure there's a clause in there subject to finance. We don't want any variations on this property. Must be brand new each and every time so as that we can claim the depreciation, the tax. It needs to be designed for renters and specifically chosen to meet the individual's personal scenario and your goals. Tax deductions, claim all the deductions by brand new property, maximum depreciation. Quantity surveyors report, we supply this with what we do for clients. And with timing and cycles, understand that the areas cycle at different times. Buy with the view of holding for a minimum of one full cycle. It's very, very important that you do that. Property is not a short-term thing; it's a long-term investment, and that's why your cash flow is so important. So it's not hurting you to hold your properties ever. Try to ensure growth in the first half of a cycle. In other words, view the recent history of the property and see whether or not it's had stupid growth or high growth in the last 3 or 4 years. If it has, then really you're crazy, because in the history of Australia, the markets tend to only run for maybe 3 to 4 years, or 2 to 3 to 4 years of a really good high strong growth. The rest of the time they just petter along, or they stay stable. Buy at the bottom of the market. Well, it'd be great if we possibly could, but again, that's looking at the cycles and seeing what's happened. And really, the most important thing for timing is to ensure affordability. With the cycle side of things, keep it affordable all the time, as I've mentioned many times already tonight in this presentation. This is an interesting article. I pulled it out of the paper, and it was talking about superannuation, and it's Peter Costello, our ex-treasurer. Costello, look, whether you like him or hate him, very, very, very clever man, and a fantastic treasurer as he was. It's amazing. He's just talking about, that the government's just got our superannuation all completely wrong. And I suppose that the last thing, when you look at it, says our stock market is still 30% below its levels of 8 years ago. There's a lot of lost years for people to make up, and a lot of lost wealth. You can see why people prefer to put their voluntary savings into less volatile assets like residential housing. They're more careful with their money than the government is. How true is that? But a very, very, very interesting article. This is an area that meets our criteria. This is north. It's Lorimer. There's not a lot left in Lorimer. It's a beautiful estate for those people that have been out there. It's a Lend-Lease estate. We've got a couple of properties that are available still in Lorimer that are in the affordable bracket. Here's one of them here. I'm just going to rush through a couple of these, but if you'd like to investigate the types of properties that we've got, then please contact us. This is the sort of property that I believe is the absolute best type of property for duplicating. We've got 6 properties down at North Cranbourne. It's a massive growth area, as you know. The Casey Shire down there remains one of the fastest growing regions in the country, with approximately 283 residents. It's the 8th fastest growing municipality in Australia. I believe that this Bendigo Court area, it's in the north part of Cranbourne. It's probably the best development. It's a private development. We've got around 6 of these left, and these are all tremendous properties near the railway, near the shops, facilities, etc. And Queensland, or southeast Queensland, look, it's a market that, whether you like it or not, you have to have a look at it and you have to investigate it, where it is. I'm looking at the Ipswich area. It's 30 odd kilometres southwest of the Brisbane CBD. It's now designated, the Beattie government, which is a few years ago, they designated this southwest corridor as the next growth corridor for the next 25 years of southeast Queensland. The Brisbane Gold Coast corridor is effectively completely full up. Then the other growth area is going north up towards the Sunshine Coast, but the big area is the southwest area. It recorded the highest regional population growth in the whole of the state of 5% between 2009 and last year. The local government area is expected to be the state's fastest growing local government area over the next 25 years, with an annual growth rate of approximately 4.6% compared to Queensland's 1.7 per annum. So look, when there's people moving into an area, it guarantees strong demand, and that's exactly what we want for property. I've been putting my clients into this area for the last couple of years. It really is a fantastic area. I've got property in there myself. This is the type of property you can buy a standalone in there for still under $500,000. Very strong rents up there. And this is another unique property. It's called a dual dwelling. dual dwelling. It's one title with 2 premises, one being a 3-bedroom on one side, the other with a 1-bedroom and what's called a multi-purpose room. Some can use as a second bedroom on the other side. So effectively, this is one buy with extremely strong rents. So this one here in Augustine Heights, under $550,000, $700 a week rent for that. An absolute no-brainer. This is another one of my clients' properties in the Springfield area. It's got some fantastic options and opportunities there. Just want to talk about this. I put this together myself. I'm certainly no genius on statistics, but this is an extremely interesting comparison. We're talking about Sydney now versus Brisbane. This is median home price comparison. If I go back to 1978, I look at the Sydney median home price, it was $46,000. It's pretty hard to believe. And the Brisbane median home price was $30,500. Brisbane was 66.3% of Sydney. 5 years later, Brisbane has nearly doubled, but Sydney's nearly doubled as well. And it's still sitting at around about the same percentage of Brisbane, sitting at about the same percentage of Sydney. 5 years later, very interesting, Sydney has basically doubled again. Brisbane has had very little growth between 83 and 88. Very, very little growth that it had in that 7 or 8 year period, actually. Very little growth. And it's dropped to 42% of Sydney's median home price. Incredibly, 5 years later, from 1988 to 1993, Brisbane's property market has doubled and Sydney's has done nothing. And the percentage, Brisbane has run back up to 80.7% of Sydney's median home price. 5 years later, Brisbane's done nothing. Sydney's petted back again. It's gone up 237. The percentage difference back to 63%, where it was back in 1978 or thereabouts. 5 years later, well, interesting. It's repeated itself again. Another 5 years. Brisbane has doubled in value. Sydney's gone up and doubled in value, but it stayed at 64%, around that mid-60s% mark again. 5 years later, 2003 to 2008, Brisbane's market, Sydney's hasn't had huge growth, 539. Brisbane's gone pretty good. It's run back up to 78, nearly 80% again, like it was back in 1993, and as it does every single cycle. We could go back for another 50, 60 years to show you the same thing. Interesting, when I go up to today, or in 2015, Brisbane's median home price is $490. I think it's just cracked on the $500,000 mark now. But Sydney's last year went and cracked the $1 million mark, the median home price, $1 million for the median home in Sydney, and the price differential, percentage differential, dropped back down to 50%. Incredible. Now, if we look at a couple of assumptions, for me, I know that stock is short in Brisbane. I know that for a fact. I'm in the game. I talk about it every day. I'm also saying, okay, well, if there's strong demand, population's moving back in there, there's jobs being created, the government's, well and truly got back on its feet after some, devastating, difficulties they had in the floods and, cyclones and things. But if we look at it, if Brisbane just runs back to 60%, doesn't go up to 80%, but to 60%, that's a 22% increase, which means the median home price runs up to $600. If it goes up to 70%, which is not even what the average has shown, then it's having 42.8% increase, goes up to 700,000. But if it runs up to 80%, where it has done in the last 3 cycles, that's a 63% increase, the median home price of Brisbane running up to $800,000. And that's suggesting that Sydney stays where it is. People are still suggesting that Sydney still has maybe 12, 18 months of growth as well. So these actual prices could be even higher. They're assumptions. No one has a crystal ball to tell you what can happen, but a very, very, very interesting slide. If you'd like a copy of that slide, please email me and I'll send that out to you because it's a very, very, very interesting stat. It's certainly one that I'm saying to my clients, please have a look at this. The Brisbane market's certainly one we need to be looking at the moment. So, look, in summary, from what we've spoken about today, tonight, what we're looking at is a way of being able to set ourselves up financially for our future. You need to buy land product. Land goes up, all buildings depreciate. We can write off 100% of the building against our tax. All buildings depreciate, but land's the commodity that goes up. We've got to focus on our income, stay in the affordable bracket. Yes, we need employment so as we can borrow, but we need to ensure that we've got reliable rent. So stick to an area where that's there's strong demand, but it's affordable property. Where there's shops, where there's jobs not that far away. But more importantly, the number one criteria, as I showed you before, why people choose to live where they live in this country is because of schooling. So, look at where there's schools, look where there's jobs, look where there's recreational facilities, look where there's major shopping centres. If you have all of that points of criteria, major shopping centres, hospitals, universities, childcare centres, etc., there'll be always strong demand. And if we just stick to the capital cities, then we'll be fine. That's pretty much it in summary. Again, you need a structure to duplicate. You need 5 or 6 properties to give yourself, you need to hold 5 or 6 properties, the whole of your portfolio, until every one of them doubles. And that means every one of them going through a cycle. How quickly you buy your 5 or 6 properties depends upon your personal circumstances that they are at the moment. What I do is I try to help people to understand how they can get another property and another property as quick as they possibly can. Again, maintaining cash flow so it's within their budget, so as that they're not hurt any time with inability of cash flow. That's my webinar. I do have a couple of things, a couple of booklets. The first one is this one here. It's called Questions to Know. It's a 12-page document that I've written that a couple of thousand people have asked questions on my company, on what I've spoken about tonight. I've put all the answers in this document here. It's called Questions to Know. If you would like a copy of that, please just email us and we'll get a copy of that out to you. The other document I've written here is a document called The Logic of Property Valuations. I spoke about the banks, how they are extremely conservative in their valuations, and I've explained it in 5 or 6 pages here of why they do it that way. It's impossible for us to get around the banking system, so we need to understand it and we need to work it to the best of our ability. Having things and controlling the valuations on properties and getting the valuations are very important. But understanding the valuation and what security you're putting each and every time is the key element. Thank you for listening in. Thank you for being a part of for this webinar. I hope very much that it was worthwhile. I look forward to your feedback. I look forward to hopefully catching up with you one day. If there's information I can give you, I'm only too happy to do so. So thank you for being a part of this webinar.